Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello, folks. Welcome back to Capital Community. I'm Jack Mulvey, and I'm here with Mitch Buonaguro, who is the head basketball coach for the Siena College Saints. Welcome aboard here, Mitch.
Great to be here, Jack, and I'm impressed that you got my last name right.
Well, you know.
I've been called many different things.
I always had Italian roommates, Mitch, and I want you to know
okay.
that it helped me because, and the reason I had Italian roommates, Mitch, was because they had mothers and grandmothers who were the best cooks and always sent the most cookies and other sort of sweets when we were in college. Mitch, let's start out. I think people probably would like to know a little bit about Mitch Buonaguro, where you're from, what you do, a little bit of what the job is, but I think where I'd like to start is, where are you from, Mitch? Where were you born?
I grew up, Jack, in Queens, New York City. You know, mom and dad, both Italian people. My dad was a letter carrier, my mother a waitress, and you know, basically always stressed. I have two brothers and an older sister, and stressed very strongly academics and you know, being a good person and working hard, and got those traits from my parents, and I've been able to carry those over, obviously, into my adult life. But you know, was educated in Catholic schools.
So you started where? You grew up in Queens, you say?
Yeah.
What part of Queens were you in?
I grew up in a little section of Queens called Richmond Hill, which, you know, a small community. Obviously, back then, you know, I had so many friends right on the block where we lived. And, you know, when I went away to college, it was like a whole new world for me because I'd really never been out of New York much.
Well, before you go to college, let's get you into high school, Mitch. Where did you go to high school?
I went to Bishop Loughlin High School in Brooklyn. I received a diocesan scholarship. I had good grades, and I was a good athlete, and was educated there by the Christian brothers.
Do you think they might have recruited you? Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, I don't want to say recruit because that was a bad word back then in the Catholic League. But you know, they persuaded me to go there, and I really, you know, I had a great experience at Loughlin. It was a great school. The Christian brothers were very dedicated teachers. They were demanding. They stressed discipline, and had a chance to play in a real good basketball program there. And at that time in New York City, Jack, there were many Division I players, and I had a chance to play at a very high level, and then obviously got recruited to go to BC.
So how did your team fare in this diocesan league, Mitch?
We did well. We went in New York City. It was a big thing if you went to the playoffs, and they took 8 teams, and we were one of the 8 teams, and we played a team called Power Memorial, very famous school where
Lou Alcindor went.
Exactly, and Alcindor was before me, but when my junior year in high school came around, Power was #1 in the country, and they were the team that eliminated us. Now, a very famous ESPN broadcaster, Len Elmore, was their star player.
Yeah, and Len was a heck of a player in college, too. He played down, I think, in Jacksonville, didn't he?
He played at Maryland.
Maryland?
Yeah.
Okay. Confusing. When you were going there, you played basketball there. Were you a scorer? Were you a point guard? What did you do?
I was a point guard, but I did score. I averaged my senior year 25 points a game, and I was fortunate enough to make All-City and was recruited by over 150 schools.
How many of those schools did you end up visiting?
Well, I got the nickname, Jack, of America's Guest. Now kids are only allowed to visit 5, but having never been out of New York City, I took advantage of the no visit, you know, no limit on visits, and I took 8 visits.
8 of them. Where'd you go?
I went to Duke, University of Virginia, East Carolina, Holy Cross, BC, St. John's, St. Joe's, and Villanova.
All D1 teams, all good, strong teams, even to this day, obviously.
Yeah, I had the chance to really, I really enjoyed that time when I visited those schools, and I met some very famous coaches. U.B. Brown, the Hall of Fame coach, he was an assistant at Duke then. Chuck Daly, who became the coach that got me to go to BC.
So tell me about, you decided to go to BC out of all these eight schools. So tell me the story of, you take these trips, you meet a lot of coaches, you see a lot of places, because you grew up in a city, and essentially the city was, the environs of the city. Upstate was probably the line where Yonkers met the Bronx, I would assume.
Exactly right.
And so you went out traveling into the hinterlands of this country. I think there was a classic New Yorker magazine cover which showed that once you got across the Hudson River, there really wasn't much there as far as New Yorkers thought.
Right.
So you did that trip, or multiple trips. What was it like?
Well, it was an eye-opening experience, Jack. Like I said, I'd never traveled much. My parents, we were from very modest means. I did make the visits to North Carolina, Duke, and East Carolina because I had made a trip there and really liked it. Virginia was a beautiful place, the University of Virginia, but those places were a little far. So I really narrowed it down to St. John's, which was the local school, and BC. I really liked BC.
Well, St. John's at that time was probably was one of the powers in the East, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Carnesecca was not the coach. The coach was Frank Mulsop, but they had very good teams. And St. John's over the years has had a great basketball program. And being from New York, a lot of New York kids went there, so that was a big deal for me to be recruited by them.
Had the Big East started as yet?
No, the Big East was 10 years later. But
was it?
My real connection to BC was Chuck Daly.
So Chuck Daly came and recruited you say?
Yeah, he was a real impressive coach. He later coached the Dream Team in '92. And
when you say the Dream Team, you're talking about the Olympic team?
Right, the Olympic team in '92 with arguably the best team ever to play together.
Who were on that team?
It was Larry Bird, Magic, David Robinson, Charles Barkley, John Stockton, Karl Malone. I mean, it was an unbelievable team. And Daly, the interesting thing about Daly was how he coached that team. He did very little coaching. He really concentrated on making sure that they got along together and played like a team. He didn't really run plays. It was interesting when I read the book about the '92 Dream Team. He coached them almost like he let them coach themselves. But what he did emphasize was team, playing together, and that was one of the most wonderful teams I've ever seen play, Jack. I mean, they were really fun to watch.
So he learned that he didn't have to teach him any of the fundamentals. He really just had to teach him how to shake hands and get along with each other on the court.
Not yell, not scream, just really be positive with him. And I learned what I learned from Chuck Daly was class. When he came to recruit me, my mother and father loved him. He was always impeccably dressed. And then when I went on my visit, one of the things I was impressed is he took me over his house and he opened his closet up. And on the floor of the closet were about 100 pairs of shoes. So, Jack...
An Italian kid from Queens sees 100 pairs of shoes.
That was it.
Knowing you had basketball sneakers in one pair, right? Is that what it amounts to, Mitch?
So forget about the academics, who we were playing. I just wanted to play for this guy. And unfortunately, he left. Actually left 2 months later after I signed, and I actually played for his assistant, Bob Zuffalato. Chuck went to Pennsylvania, but I got a lot out of BC, Jack. I really took advantage of the academics, the social aspects of the school, and BC got me started in the right direction.
So you finish up with BC. Did you do any postseason stuff at that time?
Yeah, I played. We went to the NCAA my senior year. My junior year, we played in the NIT and played against a very famous player from Albany, Tiki Burden. Mm-hmm. I actually guarded him in the NIT. We got to the semifinals and didn't have much luck. Tiki scored about 10 points on me in 3 minutes. So I do have a connection in terms of my playing career with Tiki Burden. Not a good one.
Do you know where Tiki got his nickname?
No.
Is when he used to shoot, he was such he was just an absolute phenom when shooting. But it was when he'd throw the ball up, all you heard was like a tick swish when the ball would go through the hoop. So that's
Interesting.
where the ticky came from.
Interesting.
At least that's the rumor around here, and I'm going to swear by it. So you get out of college. Did you ever consider going to the pros, or were you? Did you try for any of the pro teams?
I actually had a chance to go play in Italy. I was a pretty good player. Actually, Jack, as you know, you get a little better when you leave college. If you stick with it and practice, and I became a pretty good player in my year and two right out of college, but I wanted to coach. I mean, that was my lifelong dream. I didn't focus on anything else. I focused on getting into coaching. BC was nice enough to give me a grad assistant in those years. That's how you got into college. You did graduate work and you worked in the basketball program, and that's what I did. And worked for a guy named Tom Davis, who later coached at the University of Iowa, ironically where Fran is now, McCaffrey, my old boss. But, I worked for Tom Davis for 2 years, got my master's in history, also taught during those years in a Catholic school in Boston called St. Sebastian's, coached a little bit with the BC team. And then I got lucky. Then an pretty famous Italian hired me at Villanova, Rolly Massimino.
Did you have to be the cook for Rolly, or was this, how did this work
I had to be
out?
the chauffeur.
You had to be the chauffeur.
Make sure I knew where the good Italian restaurants were. That was a real important part of the job. Rolly was really tough about Italian restaurants. You had to pick a good one. And if you didn't, you'd hear from him the rest of the night.
Well, most of the people are probably aware that Rolly was very successful with Villanova, and took them to the finals of the NCAAs and won the game. They were the national champions. You were affiliated with that team, weren't you?
Yeah, I was the top assistant, Jack, in '85. I'd been with Rolly 7 years, and it culminated in that famous game. There's a book out now that I just read, The Perfect Game, and it was interesting reading about it, and it kind of really was. I mean, to beat a Georgetown team that was that good.
Who was on the Georgetown team? Let's go back and recollect that. Man.
They had Patrick Ewing, the most famous player, but they also had David Wingate and Reggie Williams, and they had a kid off the bench, Ralph Dalton, who was 6'11". Their backcourt was Michael Jackson, who was a great player. Horace Broadnax. They were.
It was a wonderful team. I can remember they were.
Yeah, they were a team, Jack, that you really had to play almost a perfect game to beat, and we just happened to do it right at the right time in a national championship game. But what a lot of
didn't you play them a couple times during the year? By then, the Big East was up, wasn't it?
Yeah, we played them 2 close games. But what was interesting was we were lucky to get in the tournament that year. We were the lowest seeded team ever in the history of the tournament to win it. And what a lot of people don't realize about that game, it was the last game where there wasn't a shot clock. And that helped us because Rolly was a master at controlling tempo, and we did.
Keeping the ball out of the hands of the shooters.
Yeah, keeping it out of the hands of the shooters and just playing keep away, basically.
I played for Dan Coonan. He was renowned for that. I came from a high school where we averaged more, out in Western New York, where we averaged more points per game than we did as a team at Siena. So you win the game, okay. Where'd you go from there, Mitch? Did you immediately go to get a head coaching opportunity?
Yeah, the next day, Jack, I was offered the Fairfield job.
You did?
Yeah,
okay.
I didn't even really interview. It was done over the phone. Happened very quickly. And I went to Fairfield at 31 years old in 1985. And it was a great experience. I was there 6 years. I certainly learned a lot. We went to 2 NCAA tournaments. Wasn't able to sustain the success, and I think from there, my career, I realized that coaching is about ups and downs. Mm-hmm. It's not always. You're not always on top in coaching. There are going to be highs and lows. So I learned after leaving Fairfield that I would have to go back and be an assistant again, which I did at Texas A&M. And then I had a couple other stops, and then obviously landed here at Siena with Fran McCaffrey, and we brought the program to new heights, and they hired me as the head coach.
So you were with Fran when he was at Greensboro, right?
Yeah, that's where I met Fran, and I knew Fran for many years, and when he had an assistant's opening, and he called me, and we were able to get together in Greensboro, and then came to Siena, and it's been a great run here.
You were always renowned reputation-wise among the Siena fans for being the guy that could go to the films and take out the other teams and spend a lot. You didn't see much of your wife during the season because you were always on your TV, either in the office or at home, watching the other teams play, so you could help to point out what their players do. Is that still true now, Mitch?
Yeah, not as much, Jack. I think you just made a good point. When you're coaching, you're always trying to do your best to figure out how to win. And I've always believed the more you know about the other team, whatever it is, out of bounds plays, personnel plays, you're giving your kids a better chance to win. And I think during the Fran years, I really took pride in the fact that we most nights when you watch Siena play, and Fran really gave me a lot of credit for this, that we were really, really prepared. We really knew what the other team was doing. We had some great upset wins. Who can forget the Ohio State win? And
did you play at Ohio State?
And then, Jack, I think even a more win that was even more pronounced with our preparation was that Vanderbilt win.
Yeah. Both in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, we were up 26 points on Vanderbilt, and they had no answer for what we were doing, and that was a great win. And I look at those years, and I just hope that when I look back on my coaching career, it's very satisfying to have people say that.
Yeah, well, there have been some marvelous wins with both Fran and with you. Although I'm not sure I have yet to forgive Fran for taking our number one recruit when he left and went to Iowa. I can't remember the kid's name, but I know that he was all freshman team in the Big Ten. And, but let's move on for just a minute. We were talking. We were talking earlier about the difference of what the game was like back. When you were playing back in the 70s versus what the game, 70s and 80s versus what the game is now, and not only in terms of the play but also in terms of the players. What was it? What do you see as a difference relative to? Let's start with the game first. Has the game changed at all in those?
Yeah, I think the game is more athletic, Jack. I think the players playing it have tremendous athletic ability. They're not necessarily better players. Mm-hmm. I don't think fundamentally they're as good. I certainly think back when we played in the 60s and 70s, there was more of an emphasis on fundamentals. There was more practice. There was more emphasis on practice. You and I have talked about this, going in the gym on our own and shooting a lot and working on ball handling. And I think kids play too much today.
Where do you think that comes from?
I think it comes from the advent of the AAU programs that really take these kids from after their seasons are over in high school, and they play AAU from March through August and just play. I mean, they're traveling a lot. They don't get a chance to. I remember in the summers, Jack, I used to go on the playground and practice for 2-3 hours by myself, and I got a lot better. And I think the kids of today don't do that. Secondly, I think there's an issue with the parental involvement now is much greater. My parents were not involved in my athletic career at all. I think they push kids too hard. I think they get them involved too young. I think kids sometimes now get worn out from all this playing. And, my thing was when I played, I didn't have any parental pressure. I just played because I loved it. And then I wind up making it my living. But I love that formula, Jack. Playing on your own, practicing, playing obviously in a pickup game where there's not referees and you're not being coached every 5 minutes. You're learning how to play against good players. I think we're missing that now in today's game.
Do you? And the one thing I observe, I don't know whether you do it. I see a lot of, and when I watch AAU games, I see a lot of up and down the court type stuff, and very little team play in terms of passing, setting picks, doing some of what I consider to be fundamentals of the game. The kids don't know how to rebound in terms of boxing out and preparing themselves to jump and do a lot of what are really fundamental processes if you're going to be involved in the game of basketball. Do you see that too, or do
Yes.
you have to work on that when you get these students?
Well, when we get pretty good players, Jack. Obviously at Siena, we get obviously Division I players. What I see they lack in fundamentals. They're very athletic. I mean, you can't dream of how athletic these guys are, but that also penalizes them because they think their athleticism is going to carry them through whatever they experience they have in bad. And it's not. I mean, there are going to be guys in college as good or as athletic as they are. You got to develop a jump shot. You got to develop a sense, what I call a basketball IQ. That's where I see a lot of players lacking. Their understanding of basketball. You know, Jack, you mentioned the simple pivoting, footwork. Where has that gone? I don't think kids have footwork. I don't think they have the ability to make good decisions in terms of passing. And I think that comes with the advent of TV, watching LeBron Jameses and the Jordans and guys that are just so talented that they can do anything on the court because of their athletic ability. Well, there are only 5 or 6 of those guys. Most of the players have to develop an IQ and a fundamental aspect to basketball, and a lot of them don't.
The other thing I always observed about that, Mitch, I don't know what you feel about it, but when I took a look at Michael Jordan playing basketball, they let him get away with murder. He walked probably 3 or 4 steps every time he had the ball. He pushed people out of the way. He would do all sorts of things that he was allowed to do because it was a marketing program, and they wanted to market the NBA. And you needed that superstar, and he was it. And I see that with some of the other players too.
The other thing, Jack, that players that I see don't have is respect for the ball. I've been with my own team the last 2 years. Has been a real bugaboo of mine is our turning the ball over, and it's also because of youth, but it's hurt us, you know. And this year, I know going into the season, I'm going to be much tougher on the players in terms of making the right decision, you know, cutting down on turnovers, and I've also become a big shooting guy. I think you've got to be able to make shots, and that's got to be a point of focus and emphasis of our team this year.
Well, you know, you certainly got a lot of talent. If I wanted to take a look at what happens to a youngster, let's say you got a youngster that's today going in, he's in high school, and he's going in and he's developed into where people are paying some attention to him. He's a junior or he's a senior, he's obviously talented. This is probably true also for women or girls at that level, to a lesser extent, but it's becoming more and more prevalent for girls too. They get involved in this recruiting process. The NCAA is involved. You guys have to go out on the road and see these folks. How's that process work? How does it affect the kid, and what are you able to do, or how do you handle that process? Let me ask you that.
Okay,
or any one of those questions that I threw in there.
Well, the word that you've really identified, Jack, is process. It starts now with kids going to high school. They've got to get exposed. And unfortunately, the only way they get exposed, because we're only allowed to go out in July. We're restricted on going out. So most of us go out in July to evaluate players to come in the following year. Now, you'll see younger kids, obviously, during those, but we only have 12 days in July. So the
Now, this is not only for the head coaches, this is for anybody affiliated with the program?
Yeah, that's the new NCAA rules only allow us to go out in July for 12 days. So if I'm a parent or I have a good player and I have a daughter or a son who's good, they've got to get some exposure. They've got to get to these events, these AAU events.
So tell me about the events. What are the events?
Well, for instance, there's in Florida at this Disney complex down in Orlando, they have the national AAUs. The teams that have done well in their states and runner-up teams go down there and play for a week. So we go to that. Those are good games. They're highly competitive. So, you know, that I suggest make sure a kid gets on a good AAU team and gets some exposure in July. The other avenue is visiting schools. You know, if I'm a good player, I would suggest that the parents take the player on some visits, and not when he's going to a senior year. Take him to some schools and different kinds of schools. smaller school, maybe a Division II school, a good academic school, a bigger school. Get some variety in how they approach the process. And then, Jack, there's got to be a certain level of knowing the rules, knowing what they have to do academically, knowing what they can and can't do. A lot of kids get hurt in this process because their parents are unrealistic, they're unrealistic. Find the right place. Don't find a place, Jack, that's unrealistic.
When you say unrealistic, what do you mean?
Well, obviously everyone wants to play Division I, Jack, but there's tons of good Division II schools and tons of good Division III schools. If you're a player that isn't being recruited by Division I, so what? You still have a lot of options. Division II plays very competitive basketball. Division III doesn't give scholarships, but if I'm a parent or I'm a kid, I've got to find my niche. I don't want to be shooting, to play at Siena and they're not recruiting me. Be realistic. And then go about it in an intelligent manner. Go visit some places, get to a camp, get to an event, and you can find a place. Every kid that wants to play in college, there's a place for them, I think.
At some level.
At some level. Now, can you sacrifice or subjugate your ego to say to yourself, hey, look, maybe I'm not a Division I player. Maybe I do belong at, for example, Bentley or Merrimack, which schools which play really good basketball. Or do I want to go to a really good academic school like Williams or Amherst? And I'm going to have to pay some money to go there, but hey, get a great education, and those schools play at a pretty good level.
So that's the first level. Now, assume that you've got some Division I, and Siena's a Division I school. Kid signs letter of intent. What is that essentially?
Well, there's two periods, Jack, during the year you can sign. We sign most of our players at Siena in what's called the early signing period, November 9th to the 16th. So kids that we evaluate in the summer, we bring on campus, and most of them make a decision in November. Once they make the decision, we put together a national letter of intent, which they have to sign off on, and the parents. And also with the national letter of intent, we send them scholarship papers. And the scholarship papers are basically saying, now, a scholarship is not 4 years. It's renewable. It's a contract, basically. So you sign the papers, you sign the scholarship papers, you essentially have the scholarship the first year. I would never take away a scholarship for poor play or an injury, but you can lose a scholarship because of egregious behavior. The code of conduct, if it's not right or if it's below what the standard is at Siena, or academically you just fall behind. So it's not, parents and players should understand that if they're being recruited and they do get a scholarship, they're fortunate enough to get one, it's by year. It's renewed every year. Once you get the scholarship, you fall under what I would call, certain regulations, academics. You have to keep a certain grade point up. And then at a place like Siena, where we take academics very seriously, we'll have the kids in summer school. I mean, it's a yearly proposition, Jack. College basketball now is not 8 months. It's a 12-month proposition, and my players have to produce academically to stay eligible. And obviously at a school like Siena, we've got to make sure that they're doing the things off the court that are going to keep them eligible and keep them, on the straight path.
So nowadays, what you have is, back in our day, you could play 2 or 3 sports. It was a seasonal type of thing. Seems like ancient history now that I look at it, Mitch. But it was back in the day. You could do those things. No longer possible, really, is it?
It's very hard, Jack. Basketball, like I said, is pretty much a year-round sport. And then you also have to take into consideration the time away from their academics. Basketball, we travel, we're a 2-semester sport. And it's tough. Our guys, they're not, everyone says, well, they're students, and they got to do, obviously, the academic. Yes, but they're not normal students. Normal students don't travel like these kids. They don't miss classes like these kids because of travel. So we've got to really monitor them academically and make sure they're staying on track and staying eligible and getting good grades. And one of the things I'm very proud of, Jack, is since I've been the head coach, we've had 7 seniors graduate, and we're 7 for 7. And Siena as a whole, Jack, nationally, on the national level, their GSR, graduation success rate, is in the mid-90s. which puts us in the top 5 in the country. So we take the student part of athlete very seriously at Siena, and I know Father Mullen and the administration is very proud of that statistic.
Yeah, well, that's a statistic to be proud of, because I think that, there's a whole picture that you involve yourself in when you are, taking a student through some of these things. So we're talking about a year-round program, so that means that you're able to take, what is it now, 130 hours to get it, most of the...
120, Jack.
120?
Yeah.
All right, so you're talking about 30 hours per year.
Yeah.
That the student has to go and do as far as classwork goes.
Yeah.
Do you try to get some of that out of the way during the summer? Do you try to have them take a couple courses during the summer so that they have less of a load during the remainder of the year?
Well, the rule, Jack, is they have to take 12 credits during the school year to be eligible. Mm-hmm. So if they some take 15, but let's say they take 12 each semester. That gives them 24.
Okay.
That's enough to make them eligible for the following year with a certain grade point average. And then if they go to the summer and let's say they take 6 more, now they're ahead. You've actually got them ahead. You got them on a track where they can, their senior year, they're not going to be under as much stress academically. So what we try to do is get them ahead with courses in the summer. So when they get to their senior year, they're actually ahead. And that's been a big part of our success, Jack, in terms of when I go out and recruit, I tell the parents, look, we're not interested in graduating your son in 5 years. We want to do it in 4. I mean, that's the goal. Mm-hmm. And we've been able to make it work with some school.
You're obviously doing something right over there, Mitch, because you're having success. Let's talk about your first 2 years, just briefly. Probably one of the best teams that Siena ever had. Graduated, and Fran went off to Iowa, and they said, "Here, Mitch." And so you had pretty much of a rebuilding job, didn't you?
Yeah, I think, Jack, the expectations that first year were tough. You just alluded to the 3 players that graduated. We won 27 games, went to the NCAA. The following year, I come in, obviously, the school was nice enough to give me the job, and I thanked them. Obviously, I was elated to be the coach. I wanted to stay at Siena. I loved the place. We inherited a schedule that was really put together to have a team like we had the year before. The schedule was ranked, the non-conference schedule that year was 28th in the country. Butler, Minnesota, Georgia Tech, St. Joe's, Princeton, I mean, go on and on. So, and then we have an injury to Clarence Jackson, which didn't help.
Leading shooter on the team.
So we went in starting a point guard, Rakeem Brookins, who was very good, but as you know, Jack, starting a freshman point guard is a recipe for mistakes. It's just the way it is. So with all
most people don't realize, these kids come in, they're kids.
Yeah. We
may graduate them after 4 years from a school, but they come in as boys and they leave as men.
Yeah.
And that's my observation through the years, that that's what you're really dealing with.
But I also think the real fans and the real supporters of Siena really, Jack, understood what was going on. They knew it was a rebuilding. We don't want to use the word rebuilding at Siena. We just don't believe in it. Everyone's used to being at the top of the league, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. I really haven't used the word much, but under the circumstances, a certain level of patience, we all have to have, and the nature of the fan is to be impatient. I understand that. And the coach is the one that should get the grief, not the players. The only thing that I got a little upset about was how some of the fans treated Kyle Downey. I was publicly really was upset at that. I don't mind him yelling at me. I mean, that's, I'm being paid a good amount of money, and I'm obviously the caretaker of the program. You can yell at me all you want, but I don't think it's good to yell at the players, and
I've always found, Mitch, that if there's 6,000 people in the stands down at the Pepsi, the Tuck at the Times Union Center, that there's probably only about 5,000 of them that are coaches trying to assist you. So, I mean, that's part of the game when you get up to this level, I would think.
But Jack, this year was real rewarding, what we accomplished this year. I got a lot of compliments about how the kids played this year, and under very difficult circumstances with the injuries. And these guys, and I point to the last game of the year, Jack, and Jimmy Patsos, whose team won the league, really good team, came up to me at the end of the game and said, you know, Mitch, you don't realize this, but the last 5 minutes of that game, now this was after we had just beaten Manhattan the night before, and at 12:30, and we got back to our hotel at 1 o'clock. The great thing, Patsos, and it still resonates with me to this day, in the last 5 minutes of that game, Mitch, you guys played harder than our guys. I mean, that was the hardest I've seen them play all year, and it was a testament to these kids, playing really on fumes, and giving their all. And Jack, when you connect with a team like that, which I did obviously this year, that's really rewarding.
This is one of my favorite all-time teams. I know I've told you that before, but when you have a team that is decimated by injury and by youth and other things that happen, and they're able to pull together. I think Kyle Downey was well deserving of the MVP award you gave him for the team, because he provided the leadership on the floor and in other places that was necessary for the success of the team. And even in losing a lot of games, there was a lot of success there because they never gave up. The team never gave up, as far as I was concerned.
Well, Jack, you've played on teams, and you know when there's that certain real chemistry in a team, and there's nothing like it. You've got leadership, you've got guys playing at above their level. There's nothing like that. That's what a successful season is all about. And maybe it didn't resonate with a ton of wins, but certainly the wins over Iona and Princeton and Fairfield and teams we had no business beating because of what you just said, the leadership of Downey and 6 guys banding together and just giving it 100% every night.
Well, what most people don't realize is that during the practices during the year, those 6 guys that were playing against another 6 or 8 guys were playing just as hard. And without that effort on the part of the guys that weren't getting on the floor as much,
exactly.
I think that the team wouldn't have had the success it had.
Exactly.
So, we pretty much come to the end of this, Mitch. But before we did end, I thought I'd want to ask you how you feel about the players you have coming back, some of the new players coming in. What are you looking for this season, upcoming season?
Well, Jack, I'm very excited about this season. This is a team that should be at full strength, which we really haven't had the last 2 years. The team will be led by a very good senior, Odi Anasicki, who, as you know, Jack, has really progressed and led the nation last year in rebounding. He's really making the next step, I think, to a great player. And I expect him next year to be one of the better big kids in the MAC, if not the best player in the MAC. Davis Martin's return, I think, is going to help. He's a junior. Davis is very athletic and really, I think, going to add a lot to our front court. And then you got the really good group of sophomores, moving back. Keem and Trinity, because of their injuries, will join a sophomore class of Evan Himes, who had a great year for us, Rob Poole. No one knows this next player, but I think he's going to make a big splash for us. Emo Silas, kind of an Odi Anasicki clone. And then Lionel Gomez, another player that was impacted by the NCAA last year. So in that sophomore class, and even Marcus Hopper's made progress, Jack. I've been happy with how he's worked in the offseason. And then we had 3 freshmen, Jack, who I'm very excited about. Brett Bisping, 6'9" player from Illinois who's got really a nice game. Ryan Oliver from Los Angeles, a real good shooter. And Richard Dew, a kid from Toronto who's in school actually a little earlier than the other kids and has looked very good in the workouts.
It sounds like you're going to have your hands full trying to find playing time for some of these guys.
But Jack, I'd rather have that problem than the problem of not having enough guys. I think next year we could be a team, play faster, get guys in there, play 9, 10 guys, play at more of a frenetic pace rather than the last 2 years where we've had to walk it up more.
Yeah, well, I think that could be a big change for you, Mitch. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to come to speak with us and to tell us a little about what was going on. And certainly if I was in college, I would have wanted you as one of my roommates, because I would want all that cooking that I'm sure your mother was able to provide, looking at you right now, Mitch. My name's Jack Mulvey, and I'm here on Capital Community, and we'd like to thank you for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you very much.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.